I'm a citizen of Europe.
Sono cittadina europea.
Ich bin europäischer Bürger.
Jam Europeană.
Európai polgár vagyok.
Eu sou europeia.
Jag är en medborgare i Europa.
Jag som europeanka.
Yo soy ciudadana del continente europeo.
Jestem Europejczykiem.
Esu europiete.
Sunt cetățean al Europei.
Ja grażdanka Europy.
Ja громадянка Європи.
Esu europiete.
Moi, je suis un citoyen européen.
Dear listeners of the European Citizens Radio, this is again Ulrike Gero with another podcast that we do in this format, Shaping Europe Beyond the EU. So we are always trying to have the special guests and to look at things that others don't look at. And for today, I have a really good surprise. This podcast is again in English. You are familiar with many of our podcasts in English. Today, it will be with Scotland, because today we want to discuss the Scottish perspective joining Europe, a different Europe, or staying in Europe, because as you know, Brexit in 2016, the UK was leaving the European Union, but Scotland is eager to stay European. And so I'm very, very happy that today I can talk with Andrea Pissarro. He is Italian, but based in Scotland, and he is the activist. He's a researcher. He did research work in many topics, but he's also an activist in the initiative Europe for Scotland. Hello, welcome, Andrea.
Hello, Ulrike. Welcome. Thank you for the welcome, and I'm very happy to be here speaking with you and your listeners.
Yeah, and we are happy because in the last format, I told to the listeners that we want to go regional. The European Citizens Radio wants to go regional, so we do Scotland first, and after you will have Catalonia, and after there we will have Brittany in northern France. So we will try to get regional voices, and we want to look at regional voices and how regional voices look at Europe today. And we thought that this sort of combination of Catalan, Scotland and Brittany is a very nice sort of trilogy for what is going to happen. So we are starting with Scotland, and perhaps Andrea, just tell us, I mean, you have been an activist in Europe for Scotland. Perhaps you can walk us back a little bit and describe what has been the Scottish maneuver during the Brexit period, how because Scotland voted not for Brexit. So I guess most of the Scots have been disappointed that the UK was leaving the European Union. Just bring us back a couple of years. What happened by then, and why then you started Europe for Scotland activism?
Yes, thank you, Rike, for the question. It really allows me to go back into also my personal past, because in fact, it's more than a couple of years ago. Time flies, especially with Brexit. Just a couple of days ago was 4 years since the formal date of the withdrawal of the UK from the EU, which was in 2020. I was living in Scotland in 2016, which is when the Brexit referendum took place. And I lived in Scotland for almost 4 years. Currently I live in England, but I always come back and I have a lot of affection for Scotland and for my friends in Scotland. And of course Scotland, as you were pointing out, voted with a very clear majority to remain in the European Union, with 62% of the Scottish people voting to remain. And this is a higher percentage of the population in Scotland voting for remain than the number of English people voting for leave. So if Brexit was a close call, it was a close call for Brexit in England and a very clear call for remain in Scotland. And immediately since the referendum, if you look at the map of the results, it's quite clear that there was a very different outlook in England and in Scotland. So much so that you could tell where the border between Scotland and England was based on the colour of the results. Because all the Scottish electoral district, no exception, voted for remain, and all the English districts south of the border, in almost all, not all of them, but most of them voted for leave. So you had this yellow blob, which is the area that is Scotland, and south of the border it's blue, according to the color code that the BBC used in the referendum result. And of course, that already gives you a sense that there was a different popular will, if you want, between these different territories. By the way, if you tell a Scot that they are a region, they would be outraged because they want to be described as a nation. And in fact, to be fair to them, in the UK does not have a constitution, but in the official narrative of the UK state, Scotland is a nation. It's a bit confusing because when Scotland is described, it's described as a nation. But when the UK talks about the nation, it usually refers to the entirety of Britain. So the word nation in the UK is a very confusing word. It means something different when you're talking in England or when you're talking in Scotland. In general, yes, of course. But then, of course, there is also the constitutional history of the UK, and the UK comes about as a union of nations between Scotland. Union of Crowns, actually, at the time of the Kingdom of Scotland, the Kingdom of England. So anyway, longer constitutional history, we cannot discuss it all because it's very complicated, but the story of Brexit is a story of a failed compromise, because what you would immediately think in the day after the referendum, seeing the kind of close results overall, but with two nations or nation regions, you decide, Northern Ireland and Scotland voting for Remain, and other two, Wales and England, voting for Leave, you would think that compromise was an order, it would have been something that you should do in order to keep the thing together, to keep the UK together. But history doesn't go as one would necessarily think, and as we know, the Conservatives, the Boris Johnson Tories, won the general election in 2019 on a manifesto proposing a hard Brexit, without accepting any compromise with the people and the countries and the regions that voted for Remain, and putting forward a plan which was a cleanest breakup. In between, there were several attempts of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government to put forward a proposal for a softer Brexit. For instance, the Scottish Government, together in fact with the Welsh Government, which was run by the Labour Party at the time, put forward a proposal to keep the entirety of the UK in the European single market or in the customs union. There were several different proposals at different times, but they were all rejected. And if you want, so interrupt if you want, but my conclusion and the reason why I'm campaigning for Europe for Scotland is that it's not so much the Brexit vote that shows this division between Scotland and England. It's very much the Brexit process that showed that the UK moves forward with a utter disregard for the popular will of the Scottish people. Not just the popular will of the Scottish people, but also the will of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government. So it's like these institutions don't really matter, and there is no mechanism through which they can matter for making UK-wide decisions. And from a constitutional standpoint, I feel a bit of that's not how it should work. That's not how it works in Germany, where the Länder seem to me have more of a weight on the decision of the country, and it's not as it works in Italy as well, where the regions also carry more weight. And so, that's why I, together with many others, decided to start this campaign called Europe for Scotland, which started in 2021, and I can tell you something about this if you want, or you tell me.
Let's thank you, Andrea, and let's dig deeper into this, because I mean, first to our listeners, I forget to say that Andrea is Italian, based in Scotland, which it's in itself quite interesting, because normally people leave for the south and they want to be in the sun, and so somebody was going up north. But for those who have been already there, Edinburgh is a very, very lovely town, has a super great theatre festival well. So if you haven't been in Edinburgh, go there. It's really a very beautiful landscape, and so there are reasons to go north, even if you are from Italy. As you know, the European Citizens Radio wants what we say, what we are, is voices beyond Brussels. So we do not want to communicate with whatever EU officials. We want to talk to citizens, engage citizens. And Andrea is one of those engaged European citizens who is Italian in the first place, moved up to Scotland, found an income job over there, and then realized that the political situation is basically shaping into its own life, and that the own life is giving hurdles because there is the Brexit, and Brexit is also infecting on European citizen rights for those who are living on the British continent, on the English continent. And so I think, Andreas, this is one of the motivations that this Europe for Scotland initiative came across. Perhaps you can then explain a little bit what you did in this actionism, because in some point in 21 you invited me to take part. And I remember we had regular calls with a variety of European citizens. I mean, me, I'm German. I'm not sitting in Scotland. Brexit is not my cup of tea. But still, Andrea, you succeeded in motivating a couple of, I think it was, say, 10 people or so across the European Union who would all share the interest that the Scottish people has a European perspective. Perhaps you can come back to this point, because last sentence, because then we need to discuss this, what you said, region or nation. I mean, because there's a lot of into this, yeah, if we talk about Europe, because there is one question, is Scotland a region or is it a nation? But what we are also discussing is whether the Scottish citizens, the Scottish people, are still citizens of Europe. So there is a citizens component in what we are discussing. There's a citizens component in your rights being affected by Brexit. There's a citizens component by your activism. And then obviously there is this sort of broad discussion, what is a nation, what is a region, and when do you say the one and when do you say the other? We will dig deeper into this, but go back perhaps to the first steps of your initiative.
Yes, so, well, as many other European citizens living in the UK after Brexit, we all felt a sense of profound sadness because we thought that, in a way, the country was moving in a direction which was ignoring us and our lives and our rights. And in fact, it took a long time for the British government to understand how to deal with us. Partly because there was never a plan for Brexit, so therefore there was never a plan also for the citizens of the different European Union member states that were living in the UK. And we are talking about 3 million people that were living between England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And so as many of them, I felt like what is going to happen to me? And for a long time I felt this uncertainty, and I felt that something has to be done. And many European citizens organized themselves to campaign for their rights, and there was a very long and complicated democratic battle to have our rights enshrined in the British law. Even now the UK government didn't provide us with a document to prove that we have the same rights that we enjoyed before coming to the UK. So it's complicated. Our rights being in peril and uncertainty was looming large. Partly also because of this, I felt compelled to become more active as a European citizen and to try to change things for the better. In fact, Ulrike, we met in 2020 during the pandemic in a debate where I was part of a group that were campaigning for having a coordinated European response to the pandemic, and we were discussing mutualization of European debt. But coming back to Scotland, the initiative that I'm part of, Europe for Scotland, was born out of discussions with some of the people that got active during the Brexit debate. Now, I want to make a point about the impact of Brexit on citizens. Because while it is true that initially the people mostly affected seem to be like people like me, Europeans in Britain, because it was not clear what our status was. As my friend Elena Remigi that wrote a book called In Limbo, we were like in limbo. It wasn't clear what was our status. But after some battles, we regain most of our rights. We retain most of our rights. What is said absolutely clear is that the citizens of the UK have lost rights. They have lost any right as European citizens. They are not European citizens anymore, which means that all British citizens cannot travel anymore and move to a different European country. They cannot exercise the European citizenship right. And therefore, in a very fundamental way, a lot of people in Britain are not okay with it, and they are still very much fighting against Brexit. And so Europe for Scotland was born out of a group of citizens that were English, Scottish, and Europeans. I would say the main initiator was probably Anthony Barnett, who is an English intellectual and the founder of Open Democracy, which is a online magazine that fight for democracy worldwide, and he's English. He's also written extensively about Brexit and why there is different outlook of the democratic will in England versus Scotland. And then there are people in Scotland, like Adam Ramsey, that is also an activist in the Green Party and wants Scotland to be independent and in the European Union. And then there are people like me and the other joint coordinator of the campaign, Nina Jette, who is German. We are both Europeans, we both live in the UK, and we both would like Scotland to have the right to decide their future. And this is very important for us because we're not saying Scotland should become independent, but we are saying because Brexit was imposed on Scotland against its democratic will, Scotland should have the right to decide what to do now, whether to remain in Brexit Britain or to become independent and apply to rejoin the EU, if so they wish. And that's what unites us. We campaign for the right of Scotland to self-determination.
It's very interesting, and I'm very thankful for giving these explanations to us, because perhaps for our listeners, yeah. But first, visit please our website. It's the European Democracy Lab, so www.eudemlab.org. We have network partners, and the action that Andrea is undertaking, which is Europe for Scotland. So I put a link on our website because I think that the Scottish concerns are our concerns. The concerns of the Scottish citizens or the European citizens in Scotland should be our concerns. So just visit what Europe for Scotland is doing. And perhaps because you mentioned it, that the Brits or the Englanders were basically losing citizens' rights at the moment of Brexit. If you visit our website, what we do have is also, there is another NGO in the UK which has a call at the European Court of Justice. And what they are claiming is that European citizenship is of permanent status. You can also visit this on our website because there are lots of Brits who are basically sad that Brexit has happened and who now feel betrayed about their European citizens' rights. And they are having a campaign about European citizenship is of permanent status. And this is still hanging at the European Constitutional Court. It's not yet decided. I think that all these Brits and all these Scottish people who are doing these endeavors need our, say, continental support. Why? Because and we will discuss this, Andrea, but because everybody is now looking at the European elections, we have lots of talks about Frexit, Nexit, Polexit, Italexit. So now everybody wants to leave the European Union. There's a lot of resentment against the structures and the governance structures of the European Union. And so the claims of the so-called populist party to leave, even in Germany, the AfD is running with Dexit, you know. There's Geert Wilders running with Nexit. So the Netherlands should leave, Germany should leave, whatever. So I think what I'm arguing is we can learn a little bit of what happens really when you do an exit, because you're losing citizens' rights. So what happened to you, Andrea, and to all the Scots and to all the British people may happen to all those who, a little bit naive, are now calling for these exit ideas. What would you say?
Well, yes, I think it's very easy to say a country should get out of the EU and think only in terms of the country, but a country is a place where millions of citizens live. and their rights are also associated to the status of the country. And I think it's a very important initiative, the one that you were mentioning about making European citizenship a permanent right, so that no matter what happens to the country, citizens retain their rights. But the reality is that this is not still something that is universally accepted. It's something we need to campaign for. And at the moment, your status as a citizen is linked to the status of the country you are a citizen of and in which you reside. And this is very important, because the first thing and the first lesson we learn from Brexit is that none of this was discussed in the Brexit referendum campaign. All the debates were around general concept of sovereignty and the global status of Great Britain, but no one wondered about the rights of citizens and what was going to happen to, for instance, people that have jobs and they access welfare and they want to reunite with their family and they want to travel to different countries. These were concerns that were not discussed by politicians, and obviously it's very easy to lose focus on what really matters when the debate and the electoral campaign goes in a direction which deals with other issues. It is,
it was all about money. It was about money. It's too expensive. To the European Union sucks our money and all of this, right?
Yeah, there was this famous slogan of the bus of Boris Johnson, with this sign of 350 million that we give each week to the EU. Let's fund the NHS instead. It turned out that it was a false figure, in the sense that it was not the amount given to the EU. And it turned out that after Brexit, there was no money to give to the NHS anyway. But that, it was a hot topic during the campaign for the referendum. Of course, the other hot topic was immigration, because part of the appeal of the Leave campaign was to stop migrants coming from the European Union. As it happens, that hasn't changed much either, in the sense that after Brexit, freedom of movement with EU was abandoned. So Europeans are not coming anymore to the UK in large numbers. In fact, there is the opposite trend. Europeans are leaving the UK. But what has happened is that people from elsewhere in the world are coming in larger number to the UK, and so immigration remains very, very strong to the UK, which is also part of the reason why a lot of people that voted for Brexit are unhappy, and they wouldn't vote for it anyway or anymore. There is very different reasons why people are unhappy with Brexit, even those that voted for it.
I'd like to come back another time on this very, very, I think, important question of what is European citizenship and why it is sad or even sort of tragic to lose it. Yeah, I mean, first, let me, dear listeners, apologize. I do realize that we have some little internet problems and that the sort of audio file today is not sort of that super quality that normally we can do. Perhaps it's because we are doing this over a really important distance. So I guess, Andrea, you are sitting in Edinburgh, are you, right?
At the moment, no, I am in England. I am in the south of England. So
in the south of England.
A little closer. But still,
okay, a little closer.
Super close.
Yeah, but guess I'm not in Berlin. Normally we do this podcast in the Café Aroma because our goal is to give a different aroma to Europe. So we always do a Café Aroma, but I'm in vacation. I just start my vacation in the southern part of Germany, a little week of skiing. So still we have a huge distance. So this apologizes the little sort of sound problems. I apologize, but we have a tremendously good technician, Andreas Ebel, who can do some miracles, and I hope he can sort of fix it. But let's come back to the non-trivial question of citizenship. That's why I mentioned this initiative, European citizenship is of permanent status, because, Andreas, am I right? But the Maastricht Treaty promised us that we are building a Europe that is both union of states and union of citizens. And then came the Brexit moment, and the state UK, the UK as a state, decided to drop out of the European Union after Article 50. Yeah, but the call that European citizenship is of permanent status is precisely this. What we ask the European Court is, does the very fact that the state United Kingdom left the European Union after Article 50, does this mean that the Brits and the Scots are losing European citizenship? And we say no, because European citizenship was granted in 92 by the European Commission, by the European Union, and it cannot be taken away by a different entity, and the UK is a different entity. So in essence, and I want to underscore this, but this is in a way really the mission of the European Democracy Lab, because we argue that if we want to have a European democracy, we need to have European citizens' rights, the same rights for everybody, and that this European citizenship and the European citizens' right are independent of the states we are living in. So we all need to have the same political, social, and the same European rights and the same European citizenship, which allows us to travel, to be in the European Union, because the European Union is our space. And this should not be interfered by belonging to any nation or to any region, or should not be able to be cut if the state decides to leave the European Union. So this is essentially one of the most far-reaching missions of the European Democracy Lab, because we think that we should reorganize European democracy. We basically would like to discuss the question of a European state, because then the state citizenship question would be clear. We have a European state, and we would all be citizens of that European state, and then we could have a different order. I mean, say like the Welsh, or like the Scottish, or like the Tyroleans, or like the Bavarians, or like the Catalans could be the, as you say, Länder in the European state. But this is a different discussion. What we want to have is a discussion that European citizenship should be there for everybody who's on the territory of the European Union, and that we should not have different rights for European citizens. So I guess you share this in Europe for Scotland activism.
Yes, we absolutely agree with this call that you and the European Democracy Lab are running. I think it's very important to assert these rights and to enshrine them as a principle that is permanent, that is you cannot lose, that you as a citizen carry, and build the Europe of tomorrow on this principle rather than the other way around based on member states. As I was trying to express earlier, when Brexit happened, for all of us that were Europeans in the UK, there was this status of utter confusion in which it wasn't clear whether we had the right to remain in the country, whether we would maintain the right to access the welfare state, whether we would maintain the right to work at the same conditions, whether we maintain the right to bring in our family relatives. And these are all rights that we enjoy as Europeans in every European country when we move, and it's rights that you only think about when you risk losing them. And of course, for a lot of people in the UK, and I've been talking about this with many Scots, they are very angry about losing the European citizenship right. I think some of them would very much be happy to know that there is this initiative to make that rights permanent despite Brexit. And I think some of them are in fact supporting actively this initiative that the European Democracy Lab is also promoting. So I think it's a very important battle, and it's a battle that might shape the Europe of tomorrow and how our laws are discussed and electoral campaigns are fought. But from the point of view of the Scottish people, they also want their country to rejoin the EU, so they want to rejoin the EU as citizens and as a country. And for them, it's an exciting time as well, if you want, because they want to build a new country, build a new constitution, build a new set of rights as well, and they want to do that in conjunction with the European Union at the citizens level, if you want. And that's a thing that we want to stress as a campaign. So we are a campaign of citizens from across Europe, and we want to build a bridge between the citizens of Scotland and the citizens of Europe, because we want them to have the opportunity to rejoin the EU and have the same rights as we have.
And there are other, just to our listeners, but there are other initiatives basically in the same token. There's also Citizens Take Over Europe. We also have the link on our website under the network partners. And Citizens Take Over Europe is an initiative which unites 150 European NGOs. And they are basically sitting every Wednesday in the internet and having citizens' assemblies and writing the new constitution for Europe. So Andrea, we need to discuss now this sort of junction between the Scottish ambition to create a new state. You talked about this endeavor and undertaking constitutional thoughts. But on the other hand, the European Union has now European Parliament elections on the 9th of June. There are plans that there should be a European convention, which should be launched in January 25. And this convention has the big goal that within 5 years, with the end of 29, there is a sort of constitutional remake in the European Union to allow the European Union first to take new members like Ukraine, like Turkey, like Balkan countries and so, but also to deepen the democratic and institutional structures, because it's not going to work that you only add countries to the European Union. So I think what is interesting in this discussion is that we have a Scottish side of people who want to create, a Scottish state and going for independency to join then the European Union in a way. Yeah. And on the other way, you are together with other countries who are in an enlargement process, like Turkey, Ukraine, who also want the European Union. And my question is, can we think the different or the new Europe, can we think that differently? Because if, Scotland for now, that's a question to you. Scotland for now is a region in the nation of the United Kingdom, right? There are 4 nations, if you want so. There's Northern Ireland, there's Scotland, there's Wales, there's England. It's a little bit like Spain is composed by Castilla, Catalonia, Andalusia, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So it's very hard to say when you talk about, you told us that the Scots think of themselves as a nation. But if you look for Brittany, Scotland is a region. Yeah. So now the question is, what if you look at Scotland from Europe? Is it then a nation or is it a region? And is it enough, in a way, sufficient that Scotland is somehow European, linked to Europe with a European citizenship, independently of the question whether it would be a region or a nation within a united, democratically united Europe?
Yeah, of course, these are very important questions, and also questions that are not easy to answer in a clear-cut way. What I can say is that, as we know, the UK does not have a constitution that is codified. And so Scotland is described in different documents and different laws, and the word nation is used in these UK laws to describe Scotland. But at the same time, there is not a clear, unified and coherent constitutional framework to define what Scotland is. We know that Scotland has a national team in a lot of sports. They have a national anthem. They have an history as an independent country that is very long indeed. I think the very first documents about Scotland as an independent entity are from the 14th century with the Declaration of Arbroath. And they are also have a very long history of democratic culture. And we have seen that in many instances in the history. How should the EU consider Scotland? Well, that's a question about what you would like to see, because the EU could be different things and could take different stances as well. From my perspective, I would say this. There is an element that we want to stress about the citizens. So no matter what you think about Scotland as an entity, you know that in Scotland there is a lot of people that want to be part of the EU, and they voted to remain part of the EU. And the EU should treat these people with respect. They should respect their democratic will. They should listen to their demands. And that's the first point. Then, of course, there are similarities and differences with other situations that you mentioned, because, for instance, Catalonia, that also regards itself as a nation, is bound to Spain by a democratic constitution, which was approved relatively recent in history, at the end of the Franco dictatorship in the 70s. That constitution does not allow Catalonia to get an independence referendum, so it should be amended, if you want, as a first step to be considered a country that can secede. By the way, that constitution was approved in a referendum also in Catalonia with an overwhelming majority in our lifetime. I mean, not my lifetime, but in a few decades ago. Scotland never had this moment in which they voted to be part of the UK. The people was never consulted on this issue. There was the first time in which this was done was in the referendum of 2014. You might remember that the Cameron government in the UK gave a referendum for independence after the Scottish National Party, the pro-independence party in Scotland, won for the first time a majority in the Scottish Assembly. And in that occasion, the people that wanted to remain in the UK were the majority. But at the same time, in that referendum was stressed that if Scotland was going to become independent, they would lose their status as a European country. And that convinced a number of people to vote for status quo, to remain part of the UK, to also remain part of the European Union. Then, of course, Brexit happened, and the opposite proved to be true.
Yeah,
so,
but in
constitutionally, it's very complicated. But if you ask me how should the EU look at this, I would say in two ways: through the lens of the citizens and their democratic will, and also through the lens of looking a bit more in the democratic discussion in those countries and the constitutional issues. Because obviously it's not the same thing if there is a Scottish case for independence rather than the situation that you might have, in some of the eastern countries in the eastern part of Europe, there are a lot of problems with democracy, and we know in Belarus, certainly also in Ukraine, there are problems, and certainly also in Turkey. So the EU should also look at the quality of the democratic system. And on that respect, Scotland is definitely a country that does very well. They have a very good democratic institutions that are 25 years old, but were modeled on the most advanced system. In fact, the electoral system is quite similar to the German system, in the sense that it produces a proportional representation that therefore allows for a better and more loyal representation of the popular will. And the government are always the result of a coalition between different parties, which allows for more pluralism. So in that sense, Scotland is a good democratic model. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I don't doubt it. I have seen many Scottish people in Brussels when at the moment of Brexit, and they were basically all over the place. And I remember quite well many discussions with Scottish people in this Brexit mess, if I may say so, where the Scots have been totally constructive and calm in arranging their citizens' right. But my question towards is Scotland a nation or region, and depends on where you stand to look at it, is more broad, because Scotland is not the only, say, unity that feels a little bit like a nation or has ambitions to become independent in a nation, but is sort of in a state, because for now Scotland is an element, how independent ever or autonomous ever, but it is in the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom itself is composed of several unities, like I said, Italy is, or Germany is with Bavaria, look into history. I mean, look at Silesia, Schlesien, look at Alsace, and we fought wars to decide whether Alsace is belonging to France or Alsace is belonging to Germany, or whether Sicily is belonging, not Sicily, Schlesien. What is Schlesien in English? Silesia, this region in Poland. Oppeln, Schlesien. Schlesien ist unser, like they would say. Anyway, so I just wanted to say that these regions, it's very hard to say whether Schlesien is German or Poland. It's essentially Schlesisch, like Alsace is Elsässisch, and not say German or France. Now it belongs to the French state, as much as the Germans would have wanted that Alsace belongs to the German state, But let me take it from a different way. I mean, we have several unities in which the European Union, or in which it's not really clear what is a region and what is a nation. Look at entities like Czechoslovakia. In 1989 we had Czechoslovakia, and then it divided into the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic, basically along language lines. So some regions succeed in getting an own state or their own state, and other regions like Scotland or Catalonia or Schlesien or Alsace end up in a state which is then a German, Polish or French or Spanish state, but they still feel sort of a drive for independency. So my question here is the following. I don't know whether you know the Austrian writer Robert Menasse, and he has the quote, regions are home, nations are fiction. So what he means, what he wants to say is that a regional belonging is something that people smell and taste. It's their region, and there is a kitchen, and there is a whatever landscape, a little cultural, everything you were describing for Scotland. The belonging to a nation is much more imaginary. So if you are sitting basically at the Bodensee in southern Germany, you don't think every morning of the people sitting in Flensburg. So the belonging is much more imaginary. So the question is, if we look at that dichotomy between nation and region, is there any chance, or do you think it could be interesting to think of a Europe which is regionally divided, but then that all these regions, all these entities, all these homes for European citizens enter a European state? Would that be a totally fantastic sort of idea, or do you think this is imaginable?
Well, it's a very fascinating question. I see a tendency of the European Union to produce a situation in which regional identities are strengthened and people feel more belonging to the regions rather than to the nation. But I think we need to look at history as well, in the sense that most European countries, if you want, are the product of the romantic nationalism of the 19th century, where we had our democratic revolution, bourgeois revolution, if you want. We came up with constitutions, parliaments, elections, and so on and so forth. The UK has a very peculiar nature with respect to this typical, if you want, development of nations of most European countries, in the sense that the UK originates from a century earlier, from the 18th century. It was a pre-modern, if you want, feudal state, which still has this very complex and archaic monarchy, which is not uncommon in continental Europe, but the British monarchy is quite different and distinct in the sense that they still maintain and preserve their prestige, their prerogatives, their archaic powers, their wealth as well. In that sense, they are very different from other monarchies in Europe. And if you want, the UK never went through these constitutional moments that most European nations had during Romanticism. Part of the reason was linked to the fact that the UK had an empire, and the constitutional setup of the UK at home was very much dictated by its external relations with the rest of the world. And by saying these things, I'm following very much the tradition of a Scottish scholar called Tom Nairn that analyzed the reason why Scottish nationalism as a political phenomenon emerged very late in history, in the sense that despite Scottish culture has always been very distinct and very identifiable, if you want, from the world history. We all have seen the Braveheart movie, but we also know about the Scottish Enlightenment. We know about the kilt and the bagpipes. We have a sense of what is the Scottish identity. Yet, the political dimension of Scottish independentism is a recent phenomenon in historical terms. These things that I mentioned have existed for centuries, but the pro-independence parties grew up in the last 4 or 5 decades. And this is important because it tells us a lot about this imaginary vision of a nation that is emerging now. It is emerging now because what is collapsing is this imperial nature of the UK that cannot be an empire anymore. It's not time of empires anymore. All across the world we see countries which are still subjects to the King of England that become republic one after the other. And this collapsing entity that has ruled the world for many centuries, from this the Scottish people want to escape, if you want, to build a new nation and join the modern world and the European Union. So in a way, it's a different kind of historical trajectory to that of many European countries. On that, I don't want to diminish the struggle for self-determination of many regions in Europe that I respect very much. You mentioned Catalonia and Brittany. What I'm trying to say is that it's different, the nature of the UK as compared to the nature of France and partly Spain. Partly Spain because obviously Spain still has some pre-modern feature linked to its monarchy, but at the same time modern Spain is also, as I was saying earlier, the product of the post-dictatorship movement for democracy that developed in the 70s and the 80s. And so I think they need to have a constitutional discussion, which they are having in Spain now, to change the nature of the relations between the nations and regions. And it's a very important discussion. And a very final point, I think whether a place is a nation or a region, we need to also look at the law, what the law says. And in Spain, the law says that the Catalonia and other regions are actually nations. So it talks about nations. But in Scotland, because there is no constitution, it remains unclear.
Thank you, Andrea. I think we are coming to an end, but we come to an end in having detected that it's a very, very important discussion. And we need to, I think, to have many more hours in discussing this, because you mentioned that all this little entity wants to become a republic. You know, I talk since several years about the European Republic, which could be welcoming many of these smaller entities. You know, you could easily see a European Republic which is founded by many of these sovereign republics all across the European territory. And we also would, I think, need to discuss about all these words that you mentioned: region, nation, state, republic, because these notions are not clear. What I mean is that, some entities feel like a nation, but they don't are a state. Some nations make it to a nation state. Other several entities become together a nation state. So you have many identically diverse entities ending up in a common nation state. So Europe is full of all these sort of things. And I think we need a deeper look, because if we talk about constitutions, the real question is on which level are we going to do that new constitution in a way that as European citizens we end up having the same rights. What I want to say is that, for instance, in France, there are discussions about the Sixth Republic. In Germany now, you have discussions about changing from a Grundgesetz to a new German constitution after Article 146. Then you have the Catalan discussion with the Spanish sort of discrepancies between Catalonia and Spain. And then we have the Scottish discussion. But what we see is that we have breaking up of nation states all over the European Union, and at the same moment we are putting into question the European Union in itself, because the European Union in itself is highly questioned with all this Nexit, Brexit and quacks. So I think my opinion is, and I'm very thankful for giving us insight into the Scottish discussion, but my sense is that we are heading for, in the next years, to a very, very large constitutional debate about how to constitute Europe and which are the constituting elements of this newly constituted Europe. And everything that you said about Scotland and the specificity of Scotland and how the UK is breaking up, and then you see parallels in other countries also breaking up. So what we see is that both levels are breaking up. The state levels are breaking up, but the EU level is also breaking up. And so I think we need to have very, very important discussions about where do we place the constitutional realm, where do we place the constitutional room of the future in order to make Europe work for the European citizens.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you mentioned earlier, that there should be a European Convention, is a very important point. I would say that I would just add that the Scots should have the right to be part of this conversation. And this is one key demand of our campaign, that whilst we discuss the future of Europe, whilst we discuss European enlargement, whilst we discuss reforming European democracy, let's keep the Scots in the conversation because they want to be part of it. And let's also, as Europeans, be ready to say to the Scots, you're welcome if you want to join our conversations, our project and our future. And this is really the message of our campaign.
So I hope so. I hope that the Scots will be part in the European Convention because that's what the European Citizens Radio and the European Democracy Lex. Thanks again for listening. We are struggling for voices beyond Brussels. We are struggling for shaping a Europe beyond the EU. We are trying to have different voices that unites us on a European citizenship, independently of where do we come from. So, Andrea, I give you a huge hug to Edinburgh if you go back to Scotland. I was very happy to have a Scottish voice in the European Citizens Radio. Andreas, our technician, I hope he can fix the sound. And I hope we gave you some interesting perspectives about Scotland in Europe or Europe for Scotland and why Andrea Pisauro, as an Italian, is struggling so hard to keep the Scottish people in Europe and to give them perspective for European citizenship. Thanks for listening to us. If you like what we do, go to our website, give us a little funding. We do this only pro bono. We want to keep Europe together. Thank you, Andrea, to having contributed to this.
Thank you for having me.
I'm a citizen of Europe.
Sono cittadina europea.
Ich bin europäischer Bürger.
This podcast is only possible because of you. The countless viewers and listeners support our work through donations. If you would also like to contribute to the success of this project, please click on the corresponding button on our website www.europeandemocracylab.org. Thank you.
Esu europiete.
Sunt cetățean al Europei.
Я гражданка Европы.
Я громадянка Европы.
Esu europiete.
Moi, je suis un citoyen européen.